Now tell me if you've heard this one before. Don't mess with us, Sonic fans, we hate our own series. This is a bit of a common trend that you'll see brought up in Sonic discussion nowadays, as due to the different interpretations of Sonic throughout the years, every single camp has its fans. And it's this divide that creates the illusion that every single aspect of this franchise has its haters. From voice actors to gameplay styles, there's just so much variety that there's always something to criticize in each one. But what happened? What created this divide between the franchise and the fanbase? Why are there so many different interpretations of Sonic? Is it just that Sega's very liberal with who they hand out the IP to? Or do they themselves like to experiment with Sonic more and more throughout the years? I think it's wise to start with the very first time that Sonic's gameplay style changed. After the classic Sonic games were very well received and were complimented for building off of each other, we entered the 3D era with Sonic Adventure 1 and 2. While these games are heralded as some of the best games in the franchise, there is a growing number of people who think that this was not a great translation of the classic Sonic formula into 3D. It's not really a complaint that I ever personally had with the adventure games, but I can really see why some people would think this. The adventure games are different from the classic Sonic games in terms of story, their structure, and their level design. It's not exactly a direct translation, more like it takes some of the elements and adds on its own. But I can see the turnoff, especially with the alternative gameplay styles like Knuckles being forced into treasure hunting and Tails having his own stuff entirely with either the mechs or the races, with each character's necessitating different level design to support their different playstyles. But due to the awkwardness at the time with Sega leaving the console industry, following up the adventure games was complicated. They could have done just a straight up sequel, Sonic Adventure 3, but instead they wanted to branch out a little and try something different. Now, I don't really like Sonic Heroes, a sentiment shared by and disagreed by many. But why is that? Well, Sonic Heroes was the first time that Sonic was going multi-platform, and with that, they had to make some changes. Developing a game for multiple platforms created issues with polish, and especially accented by the fact that the development time for Sonic Heroes was one of the shortest for a mainline Sonic game to date. What created these issues with development time was also the fact that they wanted a selling point for the game, which ended up being the 12 separate characters you have to play as in Sonic Heroes. And this is really interesting because going forward for the series, they wanted to create bigger and larger and better selling points for all of their games. Instead of sticking to a formula and going with what worked, they wanted to appeal to as many new people as possible, resulting to them leaving behind the philosophy of improving upon the game with each entry and instead trying new things all the time to grab as much attention as they could. A series like Mario, for example, builds upon the core movement of the character with each entry and the core level design. Meanwhile, with Sonic, when it comes to Sonic Heroes, Shadow the Hedgehog, and Sonic 06, they had to change Sonic's movement and level design slightly between each entry. It's not exactly the same as it was in SA2 as it is in Sonic 06, for example. While these control and level design differences are definitely a point of contention for all these games, the main points of contention come from their gimmicks. Shadow the Hedgehog, for example, took to the wide appeal of Call of Duty and tried to integrate gunplay into Sonic the Hedgehog. It was seen as a pointless and edgy move back then, and I think it still is. Sonic 06 was an attempt to fit in with the modern gaming landscape, wanting more grim and realistic video games. This in itself strayed further away from the vision of the original classic Sonic games, which led many people to feel alienated from what the series had become. In the short term after the failure of Sonic 06, it was decided that we needed a fresh start, and that's when Sonic Unleashed and the Boost formula was born. Of course, since it's Sonic Team we're talking about, they had to put in something else to appeal to new demographics, and this time it was God of War fans with the Werehog. But for the first time since the adventure games, Sega seemed to be taking criticism and building off of the Boost formula instead of adding on new stuff. In Sonic Colors, for example, the only new stuff was an extension of the Boost formula with the Wisps. And in Sonic Generations, they further improved upon the Boost formula, but also added in Classic Sonic as a flashback to the past. And despite not being completely faithful to the classic Sonic gameplay in Generations was still at its core the same as it's always been. So, everything seemed to be going fine. Sega was building off the pre-existing formula established in Sonic Unleashed, trimming the fat, and adding on only stuff that fell in line with what the series was trying to be. And just when everything seemed to be going so well, instead of continuing with the best and most consistent Sonic formula we've had yet, they decided to switch everything up and we got Sonic Lost World. This is one of the most disappointing Sonic games to me personally, because I felt like with enough work, the Boost formula could have turned into something special. Maybe lean more into the time pressure and the acrobatic essence of Sonic that we've been missing for so long. There was room for expansion, and you could definitely build off of a lot of the elements of the Boost formula present in Sonic Generations. After the failure of Sonic Forces, it felt like there was another shift ready to take place in the franchise, much like 06 to Unleashed. While well received by a bunch of newcomers, there were a lot of older Sonic fans who really didn't appreciate this new shift in direction. And this just goes to show that having a cohesive franchise in terms of gameplay direction can really satisfy a fan base. There are some cases where a jump in direction is needed. Some franchises need a reboot just because of poor sales or poor direction recently, so they start fresh. But it feels like for Sonic, a lot of this could have been avoided if we just stayed with the original formulas and kept expanding upon them instead of introducing new gimmicks. However, game direction isn't the only place where this kind of phenomenon is exhibited. Sonic's voice direction has been a point of contention for many years now, with 3 main voice actors in English and Junichi Kinumaru as the Japanese voice. But no one ever talks about the other languages. Maybe German Sonic is something special.
Hey, it's Amy? Hello?
Maybe not. But this kind of voice actor discussion in general is so prevalent in the Sonic community that we get a new debate every few days or so. Some people prefer the tone of Roger's voice, especially in Sonic Frontiers where he goes deeper than any Sonic voice has gone before. There's a lot of people who like Jason Griffith's voice after his performances in Black Knight and Unleashed, and there's still people who prefer Ryan's voice from the Adventure days. But with Roger being the current voice actor for Sonic, there's a lot of hate that goes out to him just because people don't like his voice compared to the other two that we've had before. You see what I'm getting at with this? There's so much variety in Sonic the Hedgehog, there's always going to be some aspect that someone doesn't like, and they're going to voice their complaints about that, so it just leads to a ton of back and forth arguing that makes it feel like no one aspect of this franchise is universally liked. Even when it comes to something as basic as Sonic's design, there's arguing, whether it's about the eye color, whether the new designs are too stiff, and the ever-present muzzle curve. That there's something like the series' visual direction. Some people feel like the realistic direction taken in Sonic 06 and Frontiers is something that the series should strive for in the future, while others want a healthy mix of cartooniness and realism like the adventure games or the classic games. So the point I'm trying to make here is that Sonic fans don't actually hate Sonic. A lot of us want this franchise to succeed, and if we don't, well then you're probably not a Sonic fan. It's just that due to the sheer variety of types of Sonic games and Sonic media, a lot of people are going to have different ideas about what makes this franchise good. For some people it's a story, for some people it's the gameplay. It can be something different for everyone, which leads to a lot of different takes. And unfortunately that also means there's going to be a ton of arguing and putting down elements of the franchise that other people enjoy. And this definitely isn't helped by the fact that Sega is trying to take more fan feedback into their new projects. You saw this when Kishimoto made his Twitter account and got a ton of feedback for the Sonic Frontiers updates. But unfortunately this also led to a bit of an issue where some Sonic fans were giving him suggestions for one thing, which was to have more challenging gameplay and more engaging platforming, which led to the towers in Update 3. So then what happened was that other people started complaining that they were too hard, and in turn they made them easier, but they overcorrected to the point where it's just a joke. Especially in Update 3 combat, you can now just melt through the health bars of the bosses. And unfortunately I don't see this changing anytime soon because now they've been provided an outlet to give suggestions and feedback directly to the people making the games. And due to the sheer number of different opinions, it's going to be confusing for Sonic Team to sort through and decide what they need to do based on the fan feedback without overcorrecting. So no, Sonic fans don't actually hate Sonic the Hedgehog. We love the series as much as we did back then, well, most of us at least, and we wish for it to succeed. But that's it for me, Davron, signing off.